I was staring at a transport form at 3 in the morning when I counted the phrase for the 11th time. Consistent with cardiac event. 11 death certificates across 4 years. Same 3 words, same coroner signing every one. The man who was supposed to catch the pattern was the one hiding it. And I was the paramedic who'd been delivering the bodies to his office every single time, without knowing what I was delivering them into. The night I walked into a room full of county officials with a folder and 4 years of proof, the coroner was in the front row, and he had no idea what I was carrying. This story took everything from me before it gave anything back. If you want to hear how one paramedic's habit of keeping notes exposed what should have been caught on the 3rd death, hit subscribe. Tap the bell so you don't miss it. Because the moment that coroner realized what I had, the look on his face told me everything I'd been through was worth it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. I want to know who's hearing this. It started on a Tuesday in October 2019. That's where we need to go. October 2019. I'd been a paramedic in Bisbee for 6 years. Before that, I worked EMS in Tucson, which is a different world. Bisbee is, I don't know how to describe it. You drive in through the Mule Pass Tunnel, and it's this little town tucked into the mountains. Old mining town. Copper. The mine closed decades ago, but the town stayed. Around 5,000 people. Art galleries where the saloons used to be. You could walk from one end of Main Street to the other in about 8 minutes. I lived in a rented casita on Tombstone Canyon Road. Had a cactus garden out front that I never watered because it didn't need it. My shifts ran 72 hours on, 48 off. The kind of schedule where you know everyone's name at the gas station because you're buying coffee there at 4 in the morning. I used to think I'd go to medical school. That was the plan when I started in EMS back in Yuma. Save up, take the prereqs, apply in my late 20s. That window closed somewhere around year 4. The money wasn't there, the grades weren't there, and the longer I stayed on the rig, the more I realized I'd become the kind of person who's good at the job he has, not the job he wanted. I made peace with that, mostly. But some nights, driving the canyon road home after a bad shift, I'd feel this quiet fear that I was turning into someone who stopped noticing things. That one morning I'd pull up to a scene and just go through the motions without actually seeing what was in front of me. The first call I want to tell you about was Arlo Preciado, 62, retired copper miner. Arlo was one of those guys who, he ran a free tax preparation clinic out of the Bisbee Community Center every spring for anyone over 65. He organized the holiday fund for mining widows. His wife, Rosalinda, made tamales every Christmas Eve and left them on neighbors' porches. Everyone in Old Bisbee knew Arlo. I responded to his house on Clawson Avenue at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, October 15th. His wife called it in. She'd woken up and he was cold. I did the assessment. Called the time. 23 minutes later, I was driving Arlo's body to the county coroner's office on Naco Highway. That was the first time I wrote notes on the back of a transport form. Not because anything seemed wrong. I wrote down what Rosalinda said. That Arlo had been feeling fine the night before. That they'd eaten dinner together. That he'd been laughing at something on television when she went to bed. I didn't think about those notes again for 2 years. Dr. Haggerty signed the death certificate within 48 hours. Cause of death? Cardiac arrest. In the notes section, 3 words I'd see again and again. Consistent with cardiac event. Arlo Preciado was the first. I was thinking about my grocery list on the drive home from the coroner's office that morning. Bananas, bread, dish soap. That's what mattered to me that day. Present day, March 2023. I was sitting in the EMS station on a Thursday night. Had the overnight shift. My partner, Tomas, was asleep in the back. I was doing paperwork, run reports from the previous week, and I had this form in front of me. A transport I'd done 2 days earlier. An elderly woman on Brewery Gulch, 79, found deceased in her home. Her neighbor had noticed she hadn't brought in her mail for 3 days. I was filling in the supplementary notes when I stopped. The coroner's preliminary assessment, which came back fast, less than a day, said cardiac arrest. Notes section. Consistent with cardiac event. Something caught. Not in my head, in my stomach. I sat there for maybe 10 seconds. Then, I opened the filing cabinet where I kept my old transport form copies. Yeah, I kept copies. Call it a habit from Tucson where everything got audited. I'd been doing it since my first year in Bisbee. I almost closed the cabinet. I remember my hand was on the drawer and I thought, it's 1 in the morning, you're tired. Just finish the run reports and go to sleep. But I didn't close it. I pulled 2022. I pulled 2021. I pulled 2020. I pulled 2019. It took me about 2 hours. Tomas was still asleep. The station was quiet except for the scanner and the hum of the fluorescent lights. I found 11. I counted them again. I put the forms in 2 piles, cardiac and non-cardiac. I counted the cardiac pile. 11. I spread them across the desk and counted them a 3rd time, pointing at each one with my finger like a kid doing arithmetic. 11 deaths across 4 years where I'd been the transporting paramedic. Haggerty had signed the death certificate, and the notes contained that exact phrase, consistent with cardiac event. I didn't move for, I don't know, a minute, maybe 2. I just sat there staring at the forms fanned out across the desk. 11 of them. I said the number out loud. 11. Just to hear it. Like saying it might make it less real, or more real. I couldn't tell which one I wanted. Now, I know what you're thinking. Heart attacks happen, especially in an elderly population. And that's true. But 3 things stood out to me that night. 1. Every single one of these people had been described by family as feeling fine the day before. Normal dinner, normal evening, found dead in the morning. 2. The ages ranged from 57 to 81, but 9 of the 11 lived alone or with an elderly spouse. Nobody was present at the time of death. 3. Haggerty's turnaround on each certificate was under 48 hours. In a county office that was notorious for taking 2 to 3 weeks on routine cases. He was fast on these. Too fast. I put the forms back in the cabinet. I didn't sleep the rest of my shift, and when I got home at 7 in the morning, I sat on my porch with coffee and tried to convince myself I was wrong. But the phrase kept going through my head. Consistent with cardiac event. 11 times. February 2021. 18 months before I made that connection. I'm going back to this one because Chester's case is the first time Haggerty said something to me directly that I didn't forget. The 4th death, in what I didn't yet know, was a pattern. Chester Barlow, 71. Found in his recliner by his daughter, who lived in Sierra Vista and came down every Sunday for lunch. Chester was a former blasting foreman at the Lavender Pit. Big hands, loud laugh. He'd been a regular at the St. Elmo bar on Brewery Gulch since before I moved to town. His daughter told me, standing in Chester's kitchen crying, her car still running in the driveway, that he'd called her Saturday night and told her he was making chili. The kitchen still smelled like cumin and ground beef. There was a pot on the stove with a lid half off and a half-eaten bowl on the counter, spoons still in it. Chester was in his recliner in the next room, TV off, glasses on the side table. His boots were by the front door, untied, like he'd kicked them off, planning to put them back on. The house felt like someone had just stepped out, not like someone had died in it. I drove Chester to the coroner's office on Naco Highway. Same route, same building. And I did what I always did. I scribbled notes on the back of the transport form. What his daughter said. That the house smelled normal. That there was a pot of chili on the stove, half-eaten bowl on the counter. Haggerty's report came back in 36 hours. Cardiac arrest. Consistent with cardiac event. A week later, I was at the coroner's office picking up clearance forms. I needed a signature on something, so I walked back toward Haggerty's office. The door was open. He was at his desk. I stepped in and said, and I realize now how naive this sounds, I said, "Dr. Haggerty, that Barlow case from last week, his daughter said he was fine the night before, making chili. 71 isn't that old. Did anything in the blood work seem—" He didn't let me finish. He put his pen down, looked at me over his glasses and said, "Son, you drive the ambulance. I read the body. Let's both stick to what we know." Calm. Not angry, not defensive, just dismissive. Like I'd asked the janitor a question about structural engineering. I said, "Yes, sir," and I left. That night I was at the St. Elmo, and I mentioned to a buddy of mine, Another EMT who worked the Douglas route, that I'd had a couple cases where the turnaround felt fast. He took a sip of his beer and said, "Haggerty's been doing this longer than both of us combined. You start second-guessing the coroner, you'll drive yourself nuts." He wasn't mean about it. He said it like he was doing me a favor. And for about 2 months, I believed him. But Haggerty's voice, "Let's both stick to what we know." I heard that in my head every time I pulled up to a scene after Chester. Every time I wrote notes on the back of a form. He'd drawn a line and he expected me to stay behind it. I remember walking past his office door another week later. I heard him talking to someone on the phone. He said, and I didn't think anything of it at the time, he said, "We're a small county, these things happen in clusters sometimes." That word, clusters. I filed it away without meaning to. Chester Barlow was the fourth. The chili was still warm when I got there. I think about that sometimes. Present day, late March 2023. I made the decision to look harder. Not because I had proof of anything. I couldn't let it go. I tried though. A few days after counting to 11, I called a friend from my Tucson EMS days. A woman I'd trained with who'd moved into hospital administration. I told her I'd found a pattern in the death certificates. 11 cases, same phrase, same coroner. She was quiet for a second and then she said, "Nolan, you're talking about a county coroner with 3 decades on the job. Are you sure you're not just stressed?" I said I wasn't sure. She said, "Get some sleep, seriously." And that was the end of that conversation. So I was alone with it. I spent the next week building a spreadsheet on my laptop at the kitchen table. I used my transport form copies, every detail I'd written on the back. Name, age, date, address, time of call, family statement about the decedent's condition the night before, and Haggerty's turnaround time on the death certificate. 11 names, 11 addresses scattered across Bisbee and the surrounding unincorporated areas. 11 certificates signed by the same coroner in under 48 hours. I made a second column, common factors. 9 of the 11 lived alone or with an elderly spouse. 8 of the 11 were on a home healthcare program, visiting nurses, meal delivery, in-home aides. That number jumped at me. Now, here's where I went wrong, and I need to tell you this because it matters later. There was an opioid treatment clinic on the edge of town, a Suboxone place called Desert Recovery, run out of a converted house on Arizona Street. It had been controversial since it opened in 2020. Some of the older residents who died had addresses within a few blocks of that clinic, and there had been rumors, nothing confirmed, about prescription discrepancies. I spent almost 3 weeks looking into Desert Recovery, drove past it, talked to a pharmacist in Sierra Vista who'd flagged some of their prescriptions. I even pulled public records on their dispensing license. And for about 3 weeks, I believed it. I believed the clinic was the connection. The deaths were opioid-related, somehow misclassified as cardiac events. It made sense. Haggerty was lazy or compromised, and the clinic was the source. I was wrong. Completely wrong. And the 3 weeks I spent on that trail? That was time I didn't have. Have you ever been so convinced you'd figured something out, and the conviction felt so solid, so logical, that when it fell apart, you didn't just lose the theory, you lost your confidence in your own judgment? I sat there looking at the Desert Recovery records and realized none of it connected. The prescription records didn't match the death dates. 3 of the deceased had never been patients there. The pharmacist's flagged prescriptions were for a completely different medication class. I felt stupid. That's the honest truth. I'd been building a case in my head for 3 weeks and it was built on nothing. I actually laughed. Sitting alone at my kitchen table at midnight, surrounded by printouts that added up to 0, I laughed at myself. A paramedic playing detective. 3 weeks of investigating a drug clinic when the answer was probably sitting in my own filing cabinet the whole time. But here's what starting over looked like. I went back to my spreadsheet, cleared the Desert Recovery column entirely, and I looked at what was actually consistent. Home healthcare. 8 of 11 were on home healthcare programs. That was the real thread. I'd been staring right past it. If you've ever chased the wrong answer so hard that the right one was sitting behind you the whole time, tell me about it in the comments, because I don't think I'm the only one who's done that. I want to hear your version. But stay with me, Because what I found when I followed the right thread made desert recovery look like nothing. July 2022, 9 months before I found the pattern. The 8th death. Dolores Kipp, 74, former school librarian at Lowell School. She used to read to kindergartners on Friday afternoons until the year she retired. Her house on Quality Hill had a wind chime collection. I counted 9 of them hanging from the porch rafters when I pulled up. One was made from old spoons. Another had little copper discs that caught the morning light and threw spots across the stucco wall. Her son had driven down from Phoenix. He was standing in the yard when we arrived, holding his car keys like he'd forgotten what to do with his hands. He said she'd sounded fine when he called her Thursday evening. Said she was watching a cooking show and had plans to go to the farmer's market Saturday. Found dead Friday morning. Estimated time of death, sometime between midnight and 4 a.m. I transported Dolores. I wrote my notes. House was clean. No medication bottles out of place. Wind chimes on the porch still going in the breeze. Her bed was made. She was on the couch. I remember her son standing in the doorway watching me wheel the stretcher out. He said, "She was going to buy honey." Just that. Like if he could hold on to Saturday's plan, Friday wouldn't count. Haggerty's certificate came back in 41 hours. Cardiac arrest. Consistent with cardiac event. But this time, and I didn't connect it until months later, I overheard something. I was at the coroner's office picking up a release form, and Haggerty was on the phone again. Different call. He said, "The blood work is standard. I'm not sending it to Tucson. There's no reason to escalate a routine case." At the time, I didn't think twice. He was the coroner. He'd been doing it for 20-something years. Who was I to question his process? And there was one moment, just one, where Haggerty sounded different on that call. Right before he hung up, there was a pause, a long one. And when he spoke again, his voice was slower, tired, like the sentence cost him something. I didn't think about it then. But later I wondered if that was the closest he ever came to stopping. Now I look back and I think, that phone call. He knew. By the 8th death, he knew something was off, and he chose not to look. I used to like the man. That's the part I keep coming back to. He showed up at community events. He donated to the fire department fundraiser. He called me son. And somewhere in those 4 years, he decided it was easier to keep writing the same 3 words than to find out what they were covering up. I can't tell you when it happened. I don't think he could either. And 11 families buried someone based on what he wrote on a piece of paper. I want to pause on something here. If someone you trusted for 28 years told you nothing was wrong, would you question it? I mean, really question it. Not think about it in the shower and forget. Actually push. Drop that answer in the comments. Be honest. Because most people don't push. I didn't push. Not for a long time. And what comes next is the part where I finally stop trusting the man behind the desk. Present day. Mid-April 2023. After desert recovery turned out to be a dead end, I focused on the home healthcare connection. 8 of 11 on some form of in-home care. I spent 4 days cross-referencing. I called families. I told them I was updating county EMS records, which was technically true. I just didn't mention the spreadsheet taped to my kitchen wall. Here's what I found. 6 of the 8 on home healthcare had the same in-home aide at some point during their service. Her name, or the name she used, was never on my transport forms. She was a contractor, not county employed, but families remembered her. Kind, attentive, worked late shifts, and she'd been referred through a program that Dr. Warren Haggerty's office had connections to. I sat in my truck outside the Safeway on Highway 80 for about 20 minutes after I made that connection. Hands on the wheel, engine off. I kept thinking about the night I wanted to go to medical school, how I used to lie awake planning what specialty I'd choose, running through the steps like it was a guarantee. That version of me would have had credentials. He would have been able to walk into a meeting and say, "I'm a doctor, and here's what I found." This version of me had transport form copies and notes written in ballpoint on the back. That's what I had. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying Haggerty knew what was happening, not at this point. What I'm saying is that the aide was connected to a referral pipeline that Haggerty's office participated in, and Haggerty was the one certifying every death she was proximate to. That's not proof, but It's a thread, and threads pull. The next thing I did was something I probably shouldn't have done, but I don't regret it. I went to the Cochise County Courthouse. I knew a woman who worked in the records office, Consuelo Vigil. Consuelo was Arlo Preciado's daughter. I didn't plan it that way. I mean, I knew who she was. I'd transported her father 4 years earlier. But I went to the courthouse because I needed access to sealed health department records on the home healthcare referral program. Consuelo was at the front desk. I told her what I was looking at. Not everything, but enough. I said her father's name. I said I thought there was a pattern, and I told her that the coroner's office was connected to the referral chain. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My father was the healthiest man I knew. Mom always said Daddy was too healthy to go like that." I didn't say anything for a second, and she didn't either. 2 people standing at a courthouse counter with a dead man's name between them. She'd lost her father. I'd driven his body across town, and now we were both looking at the same question from different sides of the same counter. Then she shook her head and said, "I can't. You know what you're asking me. If I pull those records and someone finds out?" I said, "I know." She said, "Give me a day." I went home. She didn't call that night, or the next morning. By noon the next day, I figured she'd changed her mind, and I couldn't blame her. Then around 2 o'clock she called. She didn't say hello. She said, "If this goes sideways, you don't know my name. You never came to the courthouse. Are we clear?" I said, "We're clear." 2 days later, Consuelo left a manila envelope on the passenger seat of my truck while it was parked outside the EMS station. Inside, a printed list of every home healthcare aide contracted through the county referral program from 2018 to 2023, with their assignment histories. One name appeared on 6 of the 8 cases, consistently assigned to patients who died within 3 to 5 months of her placement. I had my thread. Now I needed to pull it without Haggerty finding out. September 2022. 6 months before I found the pattern. I'm going back to this one because it's the case that almost made everything impossible, and because for about 48 hours, I thought the system was going to work without me. The 9th death. Felix Ochoa, 63. Only 63. He ran a small auto body shop on Naco Road. Ochoa's paint and body, hand-painted sign, did good work. He wasn't what you'd call elderly, but he'd had a mild stroke 2 years before and qualified for in-home assistance through the county program. I got the call at 5:12 a.m. His wife, Marlena, was screaming so loud I could hear her through the phone before the dispatcher patched me through. Felix was in bed, cold. The transport, the form, my notes on the back. Wife states subject ate dinner, watched TV, went to bed at normal time. No complaints, no medication changes. Haggerty's certificate. 44 hours, cardiac arrest, consistent with cardiac event. But Felix was 63, and his wife, Marlena, she pushed back. She called Haggerty's office directly. She asked for a toxicology panel. She asked to see the full report. And for about 2 days, I thought that was it. I remember thinking, someone's finally asking the questions. Marlena's not going to let this go. She was loud. She was angry. She knew something wasn't right. I had this thought, this stupid, hopeful thought, that the system would catch it now, that a grieving wife demanding answers would force the kind of review that should have happened on case number 3. Haggerty met with her, in person, at his office, and this is where it gets hard. I know what he told her because Marlena told me, months later, when I finally started asking questions. She sat across the table from me at her kitchen table. Felix's reading glasses were still on the shelf behind her, right next to a photo of him standing in front of the shop, and she told me what happened in that meeting. Her hands were shaking, not from grief anymore, from anger. She said Haggerty sat across from her, hands folded, and said, "Mrs. Ochoa, I understand your grief. I do. But Felix had a documented cardiac history. The body tells us what happened. Requesting additional testing at this stage would only prolong your pain and delay the burial. As his coroner, my job is to give your family peace. My job is to give your family peace. That's what he said to a woman whose husband was dead at 63. Marlena stopped talking for a second. She looked at the table. Then she said, "I believed him. That's what makes me so angry. I sat there and I believed a man who was lying to my face because he wore a white coat and used the word peace. And I signed the paper. I signed it." She wiped her eyes and said, "You know what Felix would have said? He would have said, 'Lena, don't sign nothing without reading it twice.' He told me that every time. Every time." And Marlena, she'd trusted Haggerty. Because why wouldn't she? 28 years. He called it peace. She signed the release. Felix was buried without a toxicology panel. That was September 2022. If Marlena had pushed harder, if Haggerty hadn't talked her out of that test, the pattern might have surfaced right then. 8 months before I found it. 8 months where more people died. Now I was back at my spreadsheet. Marlena's story still in my head, her hands still shaking. And I looked at the numbers, the dates, the aid assignments, the turnaround times. And all I could see was the math. 6 cases, 1 aid, 3 to 5 months each. Present day, late April 2023. The walls were closing in, both directions. I had my spreadsheet. I had Consuelo's list. I had the aide's name, which I'm not going to say here because it's part of an active criminal case. I had the connection between the referral program and Haggerty's office. What I didn't have was official standing to do any of this. On April 22nd, my shift supervisor called me in. A man named Rick Driscoll. He'd been the EMS director for Cochise County for 11 years. Rick was a good boss, straightforward. I liked working under him. He closed his office door and said, "Nolan, I got a call from the coroner's office. Haggerty had filed a professional concern report about me. The report said I'd been exhibiting patterns of obsessive fixation on closed cases and making unsolicited contact with bereaved families under the pretense of updating records. It recommended my certification be reviewed pending a fitness for duty evaluation." Rick read parts of it to me. He looked uncomfortable. He kept rubbing the back of his neck. He said, "Is any of this true?" I said, "I contacted families, yes. The rest it's not what he's saying it is." Rick said, "Nolan, I have to process this. You know that. I can't just ignore a formal complaint from the county coroner." He wasn't wrong. But the timing was everything. Haggerty didn't file that complaint because he was worried about my mental health. He filed it because he knew I was digging. Bisbee's got 5,000 people. One of those families must have mentioned my calls to someone who mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to Haggerty. That's how small towns work. You don't need a wiretap. You just need a waitress at the Bisbee Breakfast Club who overhears the wrong sentence. Rick paused at the door as I was leaving. He turned back and said something that didn't register until later. He said, "You know, people have said things about that office before. Not formally, just talk." Then he shook his head and said, "Anyway, I'll process the paperwork. People have said things. People had talked. And nobody, not Rick, not anyone, had put it on paper. You think a formal complaint stops someone who's seen what I've seen?" Subscribe. Hit that button. Because what comes next is the part where I had to decide. I went home that night and sat on my porch. It was dark. The canyon was quiet. A dog was barking somewhere down Tombstone Canyon, one of those steady barks that means the dog's been left outside and nobody's coming. I thought about my certification. 13 years as a paramedic, 6 in Tucson, 6 in Bisbee, and 1 more before that in Yuma during training. That's my career. That's what I am. And Haggerty was trying to take it from me with a phone call and a form. I thought about stopping. Really thought about it. Sat there for I don't know how long, an hour, maybe more. The dog stopped barking eventually. The canyon got so quiet, I could hear the highway. And then I thought about Marlena signing that paper, and Rosalinda waking up to a cold bed, and Chester's daughter standing in that kitchen with the car running. I kept going. March 2022. 13 months before I found the pattern. 7 months before Felix Ochoa, the 7th death. Gloria Salcido, 77. She lived alone in a little house on Moon Canyon. Had a garden,
Grew peppers. Neighbors said she was out watering every morning at 6 sharp. Found dead on a Wednesday. Her morning paper was still on the porch. I transported Gloria. I wrote my notes. And this time, this is the detail that haunts me. I noticed something I wrote down but didn't understand. On the back of the transport form, in my handwriting, kitchen counter, empty glass, residue at bottom. Smelled sweet.
I wrote that down in March 2022, and I didn't look at it again until April 2023 when I was building my case. A glass with sweet residue on the counter of a woman who died of cardiac arrest in her sleep. When I first went back to that note, I thought I had it figured out. The residue was medication, some kind of dissolved pill, maybe something from the desert recovery connection that I hadn't fully let go of. That theory lasted about 20 minutes. The timeline didn't match. Gloria had never been a patient at any clinic. She grew her own chamomile tea. She didn't take prescription sleep aids. The residue wasn't medication. It was something else entirely. That note is what changed everything. Because when I went back through all 11 transport forms, really went through them line by line, I found 4 similar observations. Glasses, cups, 1 teapot, all with residue. All in the homes of people who died alone between midnight and 4 a.m. Nobody asked me about those notes. Nobody at the coroner's office ever read the backs of my transport forms, because that wasn't standard protocol. Those were my personal observations. The things Haggerty didn't know I had. I need to tell you what I figured out. I don't have a medical degree, I'm a paramedic. But I know enough about toxicology to know that elevated potassium chloride in the bloodstream can mimic cardiac arrest. I had to put the forms down for a minute. I went outside and stood in my yard. The cactus garden was just sitting there, doing nothing, same as always. I stood there and I thought about what I was actually saying. That someone had been putting something in these people's drinks. That someone had been walking into their homes and I went back inside. It dissipates fast. In a body that's been dead for 6 to 12 hours before discovery, which was the case in all 11 of these deaths, standard blood work wouldn't flag it unless you were specifically looking for it. Haggerty wasn't looking. Or worse, he was looking, and he chose to write, consistent with cardiac event, anyway. The aide was dosing them through their evening beverages, the glasses with the residue, the sweet smell to mask the taste. And every single time, Haggerty signed the certificate in under 48 hours and moved on. Would you have kept going at this point? Knowing what I knew, that someone was killing elderly people in their homes, that the coroner was covering for it or ignoring it, and that you were a paramedic with transport form copies and no authority. That the man you were building a case against had already tried to end your career? Tell me in the comments. Because I was about to walk into the hardest 9 days of my life, and I need to know if you would have done the same thing. Present day, first week of May 2023. I had 9 days. The Cochise County Board of Supervisors held a public meeting on the second Tuesday of every month. The May meeting was scheduled for May 9th. Public comment was allowed in the first 30 minutes. 9 days to organize everything I had into something a room full of county officials would take seriously. I worked on it every night after my shifts. My kitchen table was covered. Photocopies of 11 transport forms, the spreadsheet, Consuelo's list, my handwritten notes about the residue in the glasses, a timeline I'd built on a piece of poster board, every death marked with a red dot. Tomas, my partner, he noticed something was up. He didn't ask directly. One night at the station, he just said, "You look like you haven't slept since Easter." I said, "I'm working on something." He said, "Anything I should worry about?" I almost told him. I didn't. I said, "Not yet." He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "Whatever you're working on, is it worth it? Whatever it's costing you?" I looked at him. He was holding a cup of coffee, both hands around it, and he was watching me the way you watch someone who's standing too close to the edge of something. Not panicking, just paying attention. I said, "Ask me in 2 weeks." He nodded. He didn't push. That's the kind of person Tomas is. On May 5th, 4 days before the meeting, I realized I needed one more thing, something that would make it undeniable. I needed Haggerty's own records, his internal notes, not the filed certificates, to show discrepancies between what he observed and what he reported. I called Consuelo. I didn't want to ask. I knew what it could cost her. A county employee accessing sealed medical records without authorization. That's termination. Maybe criminal charges. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He signed my father's death certificate in 31 hours. Daddy deserved better than 31 hours. 2 days later, another envelope, this time in my mailbox at home. Inside, photocopied internal coroner case notes for 7 of the 11 deaths. Not all of them, some were stored separately, but 7 was enough. And here's what the notes showed. On 5 of the 7, Haggerty had written, in his own handwriting, "Elevated potassium noted, likely post-mortem artifact." He documented the anomaly. He saw the elevated levels, and then he wrote, "Consistent with cardiac event," on the death certificate and closed the file. 5 times. He saw it. 5 times he looked at a result that should have triggered a toxicology referral and chose to explain it away. The man who told Marlena Ochoa his job was to give her family peace, he'd seen the evidence and buried it. I'm going to be honest with you. When I read those notes, I didn't feel righteous. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt, I don't know, tired. Here's what I figured out during those 9 days, sitting at that kitchen table at 2 in the morning with Haggerty's handwriting in front of me. The truth doesn't ask your permission. You don't get to choose when to know it. Once you see it, the only choice left is what you do next. I had 7 days of waiting left before the board meeting, but the decision was already made. I stood in my bathroom at 5 a.m. on May 9th, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I almost didn't go. My hands were shaking. I looked tired. I looked like a man who'd been running on coffee and obsession for 6 weeks. And I thought about Haggerty sitting in his office with his reading glasses and his 28 years, and I thought, he's going to destroy me in that room. But I went. May 9th, 2023, 6:30 p.m., Cochise County Board of Supervisors meeting. The building on Melody Lane in Bisbee. I got there early, sat in my truck in the parking lot for about 15 minutes with the folder on the passenger seat. The leather was warm from the sun. I could see people walking in through the glass doors, county staff, a few residents, a woman with a stroller. Normal Tuesday evening stuff. I put my hand on the folder and it was shaking, so I put both hands on the steering wheel and sat there until they stopped. They didn't stop. I went in anyway. 43 people in that room. I counted because I didn't know what else to do with my hands while I waited. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, a long table at the front with 5 supervisors and the county manager, an American flag in the corner. Haggerty was in the front row. I didn't expect that. I found out later he'd heard about my public comment sign-up, it's public record, and came to observe. He was wearing a gray sport coat, reading glasses on, notepad in his lap. He looked calm. He looked like a man who'd been doing this for 28 years and wasn't worried about anything. I was the 4th public commenter. The first 3 were about road maintenance on Highway 92. When they called my name, I stood up. I had the folder, and I walked to the podium. I said, "My name is Nolan Vickers. I'm a paramedic with Cochise County EMS. I've worked in this county for 6 years. I'm here tonight because I believe 11 residents of this county were killed over a period of 4 years, and the county coroner certified every death as cardiac arrest without adequate investigation." The room went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for their turn, the real kind, the kind where you can hear the air conditioning. Haggerty's pen stopped moving. I opened the folder. I placed the first sheet on the podium. This is a timeline of 11 deaths occurring between October 2019 and March 2023, all certified by Dr. Warren Haggerty within 48 hours, all listed as cardiac arrest, all with identical language in the notes section. I placed the second sheet. These are my transport records for each case, with observations I recorded at each scene. In 4 cases, I documented beverage containers with unusual residue in the deceased's home. My mouth was dry. I could feel my pulse in my jaw. I looked down at the third sheet, and for a second I couldn't remember what it said. The words blurred, and I had to blink and read the first line before I could speak. Third sheet. This is a cross-reference of home healthcare aid assignments for the deceased. 6 of the 8 patients on in-home care were assigned the same contracted aide through a county-affiliated referral program. I could hear my own heartbeat. 4th sheet. And these are photocopied internal case notes from the coroner's office. On 5 of 7 available cases, Dr. Haggerty documented elevated potassium levels, his own handwriting, and classified them as post-mortem artifacts without ordering toxicology. I looked at him. He was sitting very still. The reading glasses were off. His notepad was closed. I said, 11 people, the same coroner, the same cause of death, the same phrase. And 5 times he documented the evidence and chose to ignore it. One of the supervisors, Kathleen Robles, leaned forward and said, "Mr. Vickers, are you alleging that the county coroner falsified death certificates? I'm saying he had evidence of a pattern and chose not to investigate it. 11 families buried their loved ones believing it was natural causes. 5 of those cases had documented anomalies that warranted toxicology referral. None received one." Haggerty stood up. The room shifted. He said, "Madam Chair, this man is under professional review for erratic behavior and unauthorized contact with families. I would caution the board against..." And that's when Kathleen Robles said, and I'll never forget this, she said, "Dr. Haggerty, you are not a member of this board. Please sit down." He sat. The room was absolutely still. Kathleen Robles turned to the county manager. She said, "I'm requesting an immediate external review of these 11 cases by the Pima County Medical Examiner's Office, and I'm requesting Dr. Haggerty's office be placed on administrative hold pending that review." A second supervisor said, "Seconded." The vote was 4-1. Haggerty walked out of that room without saying another word. His sport coat was buttoned, his chin was up, but his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't get the door handle on the first try. I just stood there, at the podium, with my folder, and 43 people looking at me. I don't remember walking to my truck. I remember being in it, engine off, parking lot mostly empty. The folder was on the passenger seat again. My hands were on the steering wheel, and they were shaking worse than they had before the meeting. And then, something broke. Not in a dramatic way, just, I leaned forward until my forehead was on the wheel, and I stayed there. I was crying, not loud, just this quiet, leaking thing that I couldn't stop. I was thinking about Arlo's wife hearing him laugh at the television, about Chester's chili on the stove, about Dolores's son saying she was going to buy honey, about Marlena signing that paper. 11 people. And I sat in that truck for I don't know how long, 15 minutes, 20, crying for them. And also crying because I was so tired. And also because it could have gone wrong. It could have gone so wrong. Haggerty almost talked the room out of listening to me. If Kathleen Robles hadn't said what she said, I'd be the burned-out paramedic who disrupted a county meeting with conspiracy theories. I'd be done. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I started the truck. I drove home on Tombstone Canyon Road with the windows down because the air felt like the only clean thing in the world. The next 3 months moved fast. The Pima County Medical Examiner's Office opened an independent review within 2 weeks. By late May, the Arizona Department of Public Safety had launched a parallel investigation. 3 of the 11 cases were selected for exhumation. Families were contacted. Consent was obtained for 2 of the 3. The toxicology results came back in July. Elevated potassium chloride, not post-mortem artifact. Elevated potassium chloride consistent with external administration. In both exhumed cases. On August 14th, the home healthcare aide was arrested in Tucson. I won't say her name, the case is ongoing, but she was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 9 counts pending further investigation. On August 19th, Dr. Warren Haggerty's medical license was suspended by the Arizona Medical Board pending a full disciplinary hearing. The suspension was announced publicly. He was removed from the coroner's position the same week. 28 years. Gone in 5 days. The professional concern report he'd filed against me? Withdrawn. Quietly. No apology. Rick Driscoll called me into his office, closed the door, and said, "The complaint has been dismissed. Your certification is clear, and for what it's worth, you were right." That was all he said. But the way he said it, I could tell he felt bad about the whole thing. He'd processed the complaint because he had to. I don't blame him for that. Consuelo Vigil was never identified as my source for the records. The board's external review subpoenaed those documents independently, which meant the same information surfaced through official channels. She kept her job. She's still at the courthouse. Last time I saw her, she was at the farmer's market buying honey. She nodded at me. That was enough. Marlena Ochoa called me in September. She didn't say much. She said, "I should have pushed harder." I said, "You trusted the person who was supposed to help. That's not your fault." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Thank you for not letting it go." I almost did, though. I almost let it go a dozen times. It's been about 2 years now. I'm still a paramedic in Bisbee, same shifts, same casita on Tombstone Canyon Road, same cactus garden. The criminal trial for the aide is still working through the courts. Last I heard, the prosecution added 4 more charges. The families of 9 of the 11 victims have filed a civil suit against Cochise County and the coroner's office. I'm listed as a witness in 3 of those filings. Haggerty lost his license permanently in January 2024. The disciplinary board's ruling was 27 pages. He didn't attend the hearing. I heard he moved to Flagstaff. I don't keep track of him. I don't need to. The county hired a new coroner, a woman from Maricopa County with a forensic pathology background. She implemented a mandatory toxicology screening protocol for all unattended deaths. It should have existed 20 years ago. Some mornings I drive past the coroner's office on Naco Highway, and I think about the first time I drove that route with Arlo Preciado in the back. October 2019. I was just doing my job, writing notes on the back of a form because I thought someone might need them someday. Nobody needed them for 4 years, and then everyone did. I want to say something to you. If you stayed through this whole story, and I mean really stayed, all the way through, thank you. I know that sounds simple, but telling this story is not something I thought I'd ever do. For a long time I just wanted to forget about it, move on. But then I realized, if I forget about it, then Arlo Preciado is just a closed file, and Dolores Kipp is just a line on a spreadsheet, and Chester Barlow is just another old man who died of a heart attack. They weren't. They were people, and someone should have caught what was happening to them a lot sooner than I did. So if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe, leave a like, not for me, for the 11 families who deserved better than a 2-day turnaround and 3 words on a form. If you've ever noticed something that everyone else missed, something that kept you up at night, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want more stories from people who didn't look the other way, there's a whole channel here waiting for you. I'll tell you what I know now that I didn't know then. Sometimes, the only thing between someone being remembered and someone being forgotten is one person who refused to close the drawer. That's not heroism. That's just not walking away. Last thing. Yesterday morning, I pulled into the EMS station at 4 a.m., bought coffee at the Circle K on Tombstone Canyon. Tomas was already there. He's a full paramedic now, not a kid anymore. He handed me a run report and said, "Quiet night." I sat down. I put my coffee on the desk, and I pulled a transport form out of the printer tray. Clean, blank, and I thought, yeah, that's all right. My name is Nolan Vickers. I'm 38 years old, and I'm a paramedic in Bisbee, Arizona.